Hi, and welcome to the Childhood Learning and Development Lab. I'm Nicole, and today we'll be talking to the director of this lab, Professor Ronford. We'll be going over 5 useful tips to decide if a PhD is for you, the step-by-step of the application process, and important tips once you're already in a program.
If you want to do a PhD, like whether you should do a PhD, I think a PhD is useful if you know what you need a PhD for. So definitely if you want to be a professor, you need a PhD. That's like the credential you're going to need. Some other jobs, like, I don't know, maybe you want to be advising the prime minister on like public health or something like that. Like having a PhD in public health probably would be really helpful and a qualification you would need, right? So a PhD is going to give you kind of greater access, greater credibility. It's going to be needed for some positions. And I think if you don't need it to do what you want to do, then I don't think you should get a PhD. If you really love research and you're really interested in research, I think a PhD makes sense. But also I think you need to know kind of what you're getting into in terms of what research is like. So when people were asking, okay, should I go to grad school? Should I pursue research? I think the only way to know whether you like research is to have done research. And so that means like being involved in developing your own research project, being involved in kind of doing some of the analyses, being involved in presenting it, being involved in writing it. I think that's really important because that's going to give you a sense of what being a PhD student and later a professor is like. That's kind of your main job. And doing your own research means that you're kind of approaching what you're learning in classes a little bit differently than you might as a student. Whereas a student, you might just be reading things to get right for the exam, or you might be kind of being, okay, this is what research tells us. As a doctoral student or as someone who wants to do research, you're reading those same articles, focusing much more on like, how do I believe this? Does the evidence support this claim? What else could be going on? What else could we do? How do these sets of studies together make a particular point? How does that relate to the theory that we have and to the explanations that we have? So I think that's like one set of things already. Like if you're interested in research, you're probably already kind of reading and thinking about what you're reading a little bit differently. If you're not, you can kind of train yourself to do that. But that's, I think, a mindset shift that you need to kind of undergo, which is not just reading for the truth, but kind of reading to kind of question the truth, to kind of think about, okay, what do we actually know? And how can we kind of get to know those things better? Also the kind of mindset that you need, I think, to be successful as an academic. I think doing research can be really tough. So you're going to get a lot of feedback from people often. And often that feedback is going to lead you to change your mind, to do more work. And that can be really tiring and exhausting to always have to kind of cultivate a growth mindset where you're kind of always trying to improve. I think that aspect of a job, coupled with the fact that research takes a long time, so you don't get kind of immediate positive feedback. Like your paper might get accepted at some point, but first you have to do the study, you have to send it for submission, you have to kind of get good feedback, or you might have to revise it, or it might be rejected, you might have to resubmit, rewrite, kind of do that. So sometimes by the end, it feels like a really long time ago that those things happen. So I think knowing whether you're someone kind of handle that, I think is an important consideration. The other important consideration is, I think, if you like mentoring and teaching and doing that. I don't think that every researcher necessarily loves teaching, but I think it's an important part of the job. And so I think you have to know that whether you kind of can do it and can do it well, and whether, at least for me, that part of the job kind of balances out the research in terms of kind of getting positive feedback, because there's something kind of great about teaching where you get to see people get to new understanding, that you get to be involved in their journey, you get to provide kind of advice, and that can be great, and I think that's something that you can feel good about and you can also work on and get better at, but it feels more immediate than maybe doing the research. So in some schools, when you get accepted, you get funding because you're paid as a doctoral student. It's a paid position. Unfortunately, it's not very well paid. We're trying to work on that, but that is a consideration too when you decide to do a PhD. Like you're not going to be living it up for a few years. You're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices, and that has a cost too, and not everyone can take on that cost, right? And so I think that's something to really think seriously about as well. And I think it can become hard. Like I remember being a doctoral student, like at the beginning, it's easy because like all your friends who are working are also not making a lot. But it can, after a while, it can be difficult because like, well, they're kind of advancing in their career and I'm kind of still stuck here, for 5 years, 6 years. So I think that those money considerations like are something that you should think about as well. In terms of then applying, like how do you kind of apply to get a PhD? Well, usually the process, at least for psychology that I know of, is first you have to identify the research question that you're interested in. Like, what do you actually want to study? Because unlike, applying to a master's somewhere or going to undergrad, you don't really pick like a field, right? You're not applying to study how children learn. Like that's way too broad. You're going to kind of study a very sub question of that is of interest to you. You're going to identify the people in the field who work on that question. You're going to read their papers and see what kind of work they do, the kind of methods they use. And then that's going to allow you to decide who you're going to work with within that. Then you're going to need to get references from people that can attest to your ability to do research, to kind of think critically, your ability to be like a good team player, and your ability to kind of be part of a community and be like a good member of that community, like a supportive member. You're going to have to write a statement that explains like why you want to work with that person at that university on those questions. And that takes a long time. And I think that's something that people don't often take enough time to work on. Like you probably want to start that a good 6 months before, so you can have multiple drafts, you can have people who know you and people who know the field kind of give you feedback on that. I think there's also questions about like the timing of going to grad school. Like, should you go right after undergrad? And I think that really depends. That depends on whether you've had enough experience doing research, whether you know that's actually what you want to do. But it doesn't have to be that way, and not everyone does that. Like I didn't do that. I finished my undergrad, which wasn't even in psychology, it was in economics and philosophy. I became a teacher of students with special needs in New York. I did that for 4 years. I went back to grad school, got a master's, got involved in research, and then did my PhD. So there's different paths. I would say that when you're considering the next step, like, I don't know, don't feel like you have to be in a rush. If you're not sure, like apply to be like a research assistant. If there's like a paid position, or, after school, like after 1 year after you graduate, like, get a paid job, and, if you can't find a paid position in a lab, like do a part-time position, but only if it's like a position where you get to do more of the research, like get involved at a higher level than you have before. Do that for a year, and then give yourself a year to figure out like, okay, like, is that really for me? I think that's like a year of your life is not crazy to kind of invest. It's not going to set you back, because we're really bad at imagining the future. Like, we make it more rosy, we're biased, and like in terms of those things. So the best way to know about what an experience is like is to talk to someone who's doing that experience right now. And from that, I think you'll probably get the best kind of data. Where you end up doing your PhD is going to matter for a different number of reasons. And I think that there are factors to consider once you get offers to go to places, if you have different offers. I think even if you don't have different offers, if you're really set for a research career, you want to make sure that you go to a lab where there is funding, where the person you're going to be working with has money and has gotten grants for you to do the work that you need to do, has access to the resources and the facilities that you need, that you have a sense of kind of how much data, how many resources are there. There's different types of lab and they can all be good, but I think you have also to decide like what lab is right for you. Some labs are more like little artisan workshops where you have a few doctoral students. And so then you might get a lot more kind of personalized attention, and the PI might have a different kind of training philosophies. You might be part of a really big lab where maybe you see the PI less, but maybe you have more students in the lab, other people that can help you, a good community there. But maybe the community isn't so good either. So when you're interviewing or you're deciding, it's kind of good to know like what is it actually like to be part of a lab. How you come up with your dissertation is a great question. I think a lot of people don't come in knowing exactly what they're going to do. And this is where I think there's a lot of work potentially that goes with your advisor. But different labs are different. But I would say that like the first step is kind of, you already have a general idea of like the general topic your work would be in because you've already selected an advisor that works on something, right? So like your dissertation can't be about something different, right? So like, I study children's acquisition of like counterintuitive concepts. If someone came to me and wanted to study, children's personality development, I would say, well, I'm sorry, like I don't do that. I have no knowledge of that field. I can't help you do good work in that, right? So it has to be something that your advisor is going to be able to help you on. One way to get a research question is to kind of look at the past research. So look at maybe reviews of the past work in an area and really think critically yourself about what that body of work suggests or about what the theoretical work suggests, and then that's kind of a starting point. I think that once you're doing the PhD, you want to work really hard, obviously, on your research, but some things like whether you get a paper published, whether you get interesting results, that's a lot of time out of your control. There's a lot of times in science where you do things and it doesn't work out. But the realistic thing is that when people are going to then decide to offer you a job, the only thing they're going to be able to really look at is the kind of the work that you've actually published or done. So you should always focus to try to do the best work you can, seek feedback, get people's advice. Your advisor, can help with that. I think that it's also worth, at that point, when you're in grad school, I think it's always good to develop really good skills. And so invest time in learning skills that are going to be helpful for the research you're doing, like take statistics, or if you need to learn how to code different things, or if there's different kind of wet lab techniques if you do kind of biology or neuroscience. Because I think those are also going to be skills that, let's say you're not able to secure a faculty job, those are going to be also things that are valuable and that someone is going to be willing to pay good money for you to use. So I think nowadays, because of how competitive the job market is to get a faculty position, finishing a doctoral degree is probably not enough to really get a job right away. I mean, for some people, maybe they make a great discovery and they publish something in Science or Nature and, they're able to kind of garner, and get a position. But for a lot of people, they'll often have to do what's called a postdoctoral fellowship, where they're going to work in a lab as a senior member of the lab for a few years. And again, that's another step where you want to kind of be thoughtful about where you go and be thoughtful about who you're working with, the kind of projects you're working on. Ideally, you're kind of learning new skills or you're building kind of a new dimension to your research program. And there's also lots of, there's fellowships you can apply for, there's grants you can apply for. You kind of want to think about applying for those and building the relationships that you can do with that. And that's something that maybe starts even as a doctoral student, when you're trying to present your work, organizing symposia with people in the field that you respect, whose work you like, so that you can build relationships with them. They get to know you, they get to know your work. And all of that will come in handy one day if you're looking for a postdoctoral position and there's one in their lab, they already know of you and your work, right? So I think all of that, is once you start the PhD program, you have to treat it as I'm a scientist already, right? I think a lot of times, when you start, you might think of yourself oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just starting out. And yes, that's true. Obviously, you're not the same as a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year professor. But that's true as well. For me, now I'm my 6th year. I probably, it's a different stage than if I'd been a professor for 30 years, right? But that doesn't matter. I think you have to think of yourself as a colleague. You have to be humble and connect with people. But I think even as a doctoral student, you bring a lot to the table and you have to kind of see value in yourself as a scientist from the start. And I think taking on that professional identity, is helpful in doing all the things that I mentioned. I mean, in terms of my ultimate recommendation, would I recommend that people go and get a PhD? I think that's a very personal decision. So I'm not going to say whether you should or you shouldn't. But it is a long road. It's a road that is going to require planning, but also a lot of luck. And it's a road that doesn't guarantee the outcome that you might want. And I think if you go into that knowing that, that's a lot easier. And then you can control the things that you can control. But you have to know that there's things outside of your control. And so I think that's good to know as well to kind of help your planning. I think that if you're able to get a job that is a tenure track job at a good university, it's an amazing job. You get a lot of job flexibility. You get to work with really smart people on questions that matter to you, that have the potential to have an impact on society and other people. You get to mentor and teach others. So I think that's really great. And I really love my job. I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for it because I also know how rare it is and how difficult it is and how much luck is involved too.
Hey again, thanks for watching. And if you liked that video, please leave us a like and subscribe if you want more educational content about doing research, child psychology, and much, much more.